So to start with, on the premise that no plan survives first contact with technology, in the event of a failure, where it's a two-way process, I'm going to revert to Colour Sergeant Instructor mode at Sandhurst and talk louder. You're going to revert to Sandhurst Cadet mode and listen harder. Okay? That's the deal. All right, so cracking on. And I should also apologise that I'm getting to speak about a second 11 here as well, aren't I, in the Royal Naval Division? Right, so babes, bookmakers and beachcombers. Some of you that have followed the history of this division will recognise that phrase. It becomes more relevant at the end. You've had kind of a lot of PowerPoint today, so you'll be relieved to know there are only 12 slides in this presentation to keep up with. And you're not able to talk about the story from Gallipoli, Gavrelle, without going back before that, because I think this morning or today's talk so far have taught us that actually Gallipoli is not the genesis, the start of the First World War. It's not the beginning of any learning process. Mistakes have been made already, and things have already been learned before we even land to Gallipoli. Therefore, we have to start a bit earlier than that, and we need to start with the actual origins of the Royal Naval Division. Firstly, I did hear quite an eminent historian recently saying to an army group that the Royal Naval Division was entirely the idea of Winston Churchill because he wanted to command a division and this was a quick route to doing so. It was a pre-war idea. We know that there are around 20 to 30,000 Royal Naval volunteer reservists that wouldn't have place on ships when we go to war, and this would be a useful force to formulate to use on the ground. The initial idea was for 3 brigades, one a Royal Marine Brigade and then 2 naval brigades to form the job of doing some home defence alongside securing any port facilities once the Navy goes to war across the globe. One of the big benefits in all this was that the troops were a ready-made supply of high quality, partially trained, and that's important, partially trained, well disciplined, though I have to say I would be rifting that guy in the back row there with his cap on the back of his head and his hair sticking out. But more importantly, armed at a time when we don't have a lot of spare weaponry. These guys, albeit Longley Enfields, are armed and ready to go, and this makes them of great appeal to the War Office. Going back to the high quality part, if you look at that photograph of some of those original men of the 1914 Royal Naval Division, actually they're all of a good size and height and strength, yeah? They're all strapping laterally, so we can say they've got the high quality there. Any gaps in the ranks are soon filled. Kitchener's one of his very first speeches as Secretary of State is to announce the raising of this division as such, and that sort of springs into action many men who are going to think of joining into the Royal Naval Division. There's going to be a solid background when it comes to the recruiting and the training, because this is going to be done by Royal Marines, and also by the Brigade of Guards providing instructors. And in some cases, those guardsmen are going to go on to serve with the division, most notably Lieutenant Colonel Quilter, who was killed commanding the Hood Battalion at Krithia later on in the war. So there is an origins of the Royal Naval Division long before Kitchener says, your country needs you. The idea being they're not going to be used, they're going to be used for home defence, but as you know, the situation on the Western Front deteriorates fairly rapidly, and it's decided as early as the 28th of August to send some of these overseas. That famous photograph there on your right of the defence of Antwerp. Initially it's a Marine Brigade that goes overseas, and they put up a defensive screen around Ostend. There's a real fear at this stage that the Germans are going to seize those channel ports while we are on our way back down south still, heading towards Marne. The support that those Marines have are effectively bicycle patrols. No cavalry, no artillery support, no supply train for logistics, and absolutely no engineer support whatsoever. So basically bicycle patrols to go out and see where the enemy are, if at all. It's on the 18th of September that John French decides that we actually need to step up and protect Antwerp. Hastily is arranged a supportive network of units. These involve the Queen's Own Auxiliaries, sometimes referred to as queer objects on horseback. They're going to go across and provide that sort of cavalry stream for the unit. We do get some Royal Engineers across there to help with sort of bridging if required, but also field engineering products. But more importantly, the first use of that Royal Naval armoured car section underneath Commander Sampson. Now this is relevant from Western Front point of view. For those of you that know Ypres so well, and the Ypres salient, of course, you know the area from New Irish Farm up towards St Julian is very well often referred to as Admiral's Road. The origins of Admiral's Road coming from Commander Sampson, so well known in the area. Driving up and down there goes the Admiral. So Sampson is going to offer the sort of heavier support, and the Royal Naval Armoured Car Section, good idea. Wormwood Scrubs being their sort of headquarters, soon gets a reputation, and not always to the good, referred to as the motor bandits by their general dress and attire. Within a year, this is something that the Army considers they'd like, and the Navy's not so sure what to do with them. But anyway, they're also backed up with this deployment of London omnibuses, which we think of more readily with the First Battle of Ypres, yet they're first deployed here to Antwerp. And interestingly, the drivers from the London buses are actually enlisted into the Royal Marines. So they don't just go as city drivers, they are enlisted into the Royal Marines. A lot of the accounts that we read, and in fact I used 4 accounts to get together the basis of facts of this, all 3 of the 4 mentioned listening to lectures about Stonewall Jackson's Shenandoah Valley campaign and the parallels between Antwerp and what had occurred there in what was fairly contemporary history in the 1860s. Effectively, the maxim from that was the race was on to get to Antwerp. So what happens in this race? Because it's not a great ending really. By the 2nd of October, the Germans have captured the outer Belgian forts. By the 4th of October, we get the Marine Brigade now arriving in Antwerp, and they take up positions along the Scheldt. By the 7th of October, the further 2 brigades arrive, and as Rupert Brooke refers to it, everyone cheered and flung themselves on us. They gave us apples and chocolate and kisses. So at this stage, it was still, here are the British, these are guys going to deliver us from this threat of evil. Sadly, by the 9th, just 48 hours later, the inner forts fell, and the German armies had run the race and entered into Antwerp itself. And so this offered 2 options for the British, really. One was to retire with the Belgians back onto the Yser, or to escape to the north, and as we know, that ended with facing the internment in the Netherlands. There's quite an interesting short account that comes out of the Hawk Battalion history that talks about the confusion of that initial incursion. Then started our weary march, and as Mac Radin was not a strong point, we successfully lost our way. At one point we marched at least 6 kilometres across a straight, dusty road, only to have to turn back. During the afternoon, the report received from a scout in front that a party of mounted Uhlans was barring our way. The whole battalion promptly lined a turnip field 2 deep and started to blaze away, the rear ranks firing in very unpleasant proximity to the front ranks' heads. Commander Beadle dashed out in front, how he escaped being shot, only Lord knows, and shouted out the orders to stop fire. It was then discovered that we were firing at some Belgian cavalry, who had returned our fire hotly. No damage was done to either side. We eventually reached St Giles Waste about 4 p.m, and the last train had already left. By this time, the battalion was sadly attenuated, many men having dropped by the wayside. The Marine Sergeant, an ex-postman, attached to our company was a tower of strength and endeavoured to cheer the men up with scurrilous songs. It was at Giles Waste that we were told that the Dutch frontier was only 5 miles away, and that so long as we managed to get through Holland in 24 hours, we should be able to get home to England. This was an unfortunate mix-up between the Navy and the military rules of war. On we staggered. March discipline was long since ceased, and we were just a straggling mob, footsore, weary and utterly dejected. On arriving at Lachinge on the frontier, we discovered our mistake, and that, if we entered Holland, we should be interned. Doesn't actually cover that there's a Hawk Battalion with glory there, does it, and that initial thing. Lots of confusion, not a lot of knowledge of exactly what's going on. Some of the men did escape. In fact, only 3 members of the Hawk Battalion actually get away. And they get away by pretending they are workers for the Anglo-Continental Gas Association, where they somehow get to Flushing. They get challenged by the local police, but manage to pass themselves off as civilians and eventually get back to the UK. All 3 of those men are going to be involved in the Gallipoli campaign. But effectively, at the end of that, Hawk, Collingwood and Benbow battalions are pretty much interned in Antwerp for the rest of the war. One last thing there, it's a lovely quote from Gerald's history that says, when going abroad, the train that was to take them from Dunkirk to Antwerp in 1914, the Anson and the Hood battalions were warned that in case the train was attacked during the night, the ensign were to fall in on the port and the hood on the starboard side of the train, reinforcing that this is a naval division with naval traditions that are going to see them through the whole of this war. And I think that's important to their character and the way they act throughout the war. So how are we going to rebuild this division? Well, it needs to start from scratch again. Fortunately, by now, the answer to Kitchener's question had been answered. Hundreds of thousands of men had flocked to the colours, and in the northeast in particular, there was quite a few extra men that weren't able to join local units. These were all given sort of KX service numbers and drafted in from Kitchener's army to go in to reform this naval division. One of those guys is Thomas Russell, number 513, so a miner from Stockton-on-Seas, one of the early men to enlist. This is a bit of a show and tell this afternoon, as you saw from the back of the room. We've got his 1914 Star Bar and Trio here, one of those original guys that enlisted. And his story will evolve as we go through the talk, but he's going to serve both in Gallipoli and on the Western Front. Around about the same time, and this is my personal connection with this story, there's a similar draft that comes in from London, and predominantly southeast London. And this magnificent quote from the history of Hawk Battalion is something that will become apparent on the last slide. The Army's loss was the Hawk Battalion's gain. This miscellaneous, cheerful, enthusiastic, and wholly undisciplined collection of babes, bookmakers, and beachcombers became known for purposes of official returns as D Company, the Hawk Battalion. Isn't that a lovely quote? Lovely quote. After they have been sort of through the Crystal Palace, they move off to Blandford where they do their training. And the key to this training is to retain that naval tradition where possible, and also any of the Antwerp men were put into these battalions to kind of give them that sort of credibility that have been around a while. For Hawk Battalion in particular, this is the point where Sidney Vere Harmsworth joins the battalion, having served with a different battalion earlier on in the Antwerp campaign, and gets through. So let's look at training units for Gallipoli. The reality of this, we're fortunate enough that the Royal Naval Division training pamphlet is actually available, quite widely available, so we can look at exactly what these guys learnt before they went overseas. We've heard a fair bit today about Army doctrine. The nearest thing that the British Army has to the doctrine in the First World War is Field-Service Regulations. I think it's that I've learned in history that if you can't think who says it, attribute it to Rommel and everyone nods. So I'm going to say it's Rommel that says the British Army put out the greatest doctrine in the war, but thankfully the British officer is the least likely person to read it. So this is the training syllabus anyway. It's not really a doctrine, but it's telling you how we're going to train. And intriguingly, it's not just about saluting, taking your cap off pay parade, and 1 hour charging a sort of a sandbag with a sergeant shouting at you. In that 5-week syllabus, they learn to defend villages, assault villages, defend a river line, attack and defence of wood, be part of a rear guard and a retreating force, and more importantly, take part in nighttime operations. Now that might not be the standard of junior and senior Brecon, but it's actually, they are teaching them these things at a very early stage. More importantly, I thought, was that luxury there, 40 hours of range time. 40 hours of range time. Now I know they say it's musketry, but the vast majority of that is on a range. That's quite impressive. And at the bottom there, 11 hours bayonet instruction. As soon as I read that, that immediately sprung to mind Siegfried Sassoon's experiences of his disappointment when he reneges his letter and comes back to the Western Front to join his beloved Royal-Welsh Fusiliers, and the disappointment when he's attached to the 25th Royal-Welsh Fusiliers, thinking, who are these Herberts? You know, this isn't my original battalion, only to discover within a week that these are the finest men he felt he'd served with, partly because of their skill and use of the bayonet, which is something that the MEF, I think, can contribute to the Western Front. It's no coincidence that when the 25th Royal Welsh Fusiliers land on the Western Front in 1918, and they're put through a bayonet course, to a man they complain about the level of instruction, they complain about how outdated it is, and within a few weeks they're actually running the course. The Gallipoli man has more experience of the bayonet than someone that served in France. That's a big statement to make, isn't it? And equally at the bottom there, this idea of local in-theatre training for amphibious operations, I'm probably stretching apart there. Because they're Navy, they have more access to some of the Navy amphibious training. It's not today where you look through the 4 phases of an amphibious assault, which would be the raid, the demonstration, the assault and the withdrawal. It's literally then how to get in the boats, how to get out the boats. And of course, as we know from the initial landings to by the time we get to Suvla, the amphibious operations has changed quite significantly. But nevertheless, a bit more training than some people would have you believe for units serving at Gallipoli. So the early days for the division, when they land, the 63rd Royal Naval Division, or the Royal Naval Division as they were at that time, can boast that on the 25th of April, they landed men at V, W, X and Y beaches, as well as the feint along Belair, and we'll look at Belair and we'll look at that in a moment. Here are the beaches, as we can see, S beach being Morto Bay, that not so much, but a V beach. This is where Sub-Lieutenant Tisdall was awarded, Advanced Battalion awarded Victoria Cross for trying to seize the initiative, which is key to Gallipoli. We've heard it a lot today. Once you've got that initiative, it's about not losing it. V Beach, of course, is not the most successful of the landings, but nevertheless Tisdall, amongst others, do show their worth that day in saving lives and trying to keep defensive spirit going. Down at W Beach, they can take part there. They don't claim 6 VCs before breakfast, but then again, the Lancashire Fusiliers had breakfast before the VCs for being picky, but they were involved. They send some men at W Beach as well. At X Beach, that kind of forgotten action where HMS Implacable lands the Royal Fusiliers, who get dragged straight into an attack, but I think should take more credit. The capture of 114, which actually puts more pressure on anyone on Lancashire landing, which then, along with the 4th Worcesters coming into the back here, does quite a lot for the defence of, or the assault of V Beach, certainly in the second 24 hours, if not the first. And then, of course, the most famous incident for them on the first day, which is up at Y Beach there, where we have Colonel Matthews alongside Lieutenant Colonel Coe of the Borders arguing about the seniority. We sometimes get dragged into that because it's an interesting trivial point. But the reality is they do cross Gully Ravine, get to within sight of the Crifia itself before coming back and, as per doctrine, taking up a defensive position awaiting orders. Twice that message is sent to Hunter Weston, twice Hamilton says, don't you think you should look at that? And twice it gets lost, and so we get an insight into why perhaps sometimes Ian Hampton wasn't pushy enough to say, stop what you're doing and look at that. Both commanders get dragged into the war they can see, not the war that's going on around them, which is quite telling on the day. Perhaps the most glamorous account is this chap here that you'll all recognise as Bernard Frapeman, appropriately dressed for his operation up there at Belair. And I'll just read the very brief account because it's so well written. This is where he decides to pretty much go on a one-man patrol ashore. Crawling about, naked, I think let's start here. The night was dark and a touch of frost in the air, and there was a slight sea running in the Gulf of Zeros when Freyberg, painted black and greased to keep out the cold, was lowered into the water with a little canvas raft of flares. He was armed with a small revolver, with a sheath knife slung around his waist, and wearing a small luminous wristwatch compass for direction in case the stars became obscured. The start was made at 10 p.m. It was dark and unattractive, save for the phosphorescent splash of the muffled oars of the ship's boat. By some miscalculation in the dark of the distance, 2 miles had to be swum, and it was midnight before a landing was effected. The raft was hidden while a reconnaissance of the enemy position above the cliff was carried out. Crawling about naked on an open, exposed cliff after 2 hours' swim on a cold, windy April night was not a very cheerful occupation. But Freyberg was able, in spite of the noise from his chattering teeth, to get close up to the enemy trenches on the cliffs. After a few minutes of searching, the raft was recovered and the first flare was lighted on the beach. Immediately, machine gun fire was opened from the picket boats all round, and the British warships bombarded the beaches. Freyberg then had to take refuge in the water to avoid being shot. But swimming in the direction of the Belair line was able to light 2 further flares on the beaches a quarter of a mile apart. When this had been accomplished, the mission was at an end. The stars were all covered by clouds, and so on a compass bearing due south, he made a start on the inhospitable shore, in the hope of being picked up in the dark by a destroyer or picket boat. The ships, of course, showed no light, and there was no flashes from the guns, which were now silent. It was by meagre chance, but after 2 hours swimming, Commander Freyberg was retrieved, cramped and nearly dead with cold. It's quite unfair, isn't it? DSO for that, or was it DSC? Mainly because in Pro College you have to witness Victoria Cross, and obviously there's no one there to witness it for him. But an early use of dissection plans, if you like, in the Gallipoli campaign. By May, this had kind of settled out, and we now find that the division takes over the Helles, what I've referred to as the Helles Eastern Sector. One of the things that came up this morning in a couple of talks was the problems of if you're a manoeuvrist, which is a modern military phrase, or creating a battle space. This is almost impossible at Gallipoli. There is nowhere to move. There is no way that you can create that space for a breakthrough, and you can see the complexity of those trench lines there, showing that there's no space. The area we're going to look at is this space here. So this is Helles East, and we can see by looking at modern day trench maps some of the legacies of the men that served there, and those that are still named by the Royal Naval Division. That's my favourite spot. Royal Naval Division Engineer Dun. Isn't that a great name for a spot? I've got a letter I'm going to read at the end that was written just about there, we think. We can see that where the 29th Division were, all around here, we can pick up their names, obviously the Essex being part of that, Shelton Street, Munster Terrace and Munster Fusiliers. We've got Worcester Flat from the 4th Worcesters as well. And then as we go across, the 42nd East Lancashire Division that land start to dig. Colin and be exceptionally proud of that place there. Oldham Road, you see, Oldham is known outside of Lancashire there. Wigan Road, Ardwick Green, Renfield Street, it's some more instance here, Wigan Road. And of course, over this side of the main Crofia Road, we can see East Crofia Road, we start to see Plymouth Avenue, Nelson Avenue there, and even this Argyle Street. This is the area the Royal Naval Division is going to operate in for the next few months at their time in the Helles campaign. But again, more than one trencher. When you see it like that, you realise how that landscape was compressed, what a compressed battlefield it was. And this being key to it, of course. We can see Gallipoli Ravine a bit further over where men could shelter. So let's have a look at what occurred on the third Battle of Crofia, 4th of June 1915. Firstly, they're not going into this blind. That division's actually had experience of the ground and have attacked a couple of times earlier in May. Now these are principally enabling actions, securing a start line, feeling your way forward. In many cases they don't know where the enemy are. You rush forward until you come across an Ottoman or Turkish trench, and then you decide where the enemy are. Very little scope for patrol work in the meantime. So the plan is effectively a direct frontal assault on the first Turkish front line. This is going to be assisted by very derisory, if not limited, artillery, about 1/3 of what the Western Front artillery barrage would have been at the same time. Now I say that at the same time, this is a bit of a bugbear of Stephen and mine. We continually are comparing the Gallipoli campaign with the Western Front campaign, but invariably that's Gallipoli 1915 against the Western Front 1918. Let's stop that. Let's look at the Gallipoli 1915 against the Western Front 1915. So that's a level playing field. I think that's quite important. Here's a little innovation for you, I think. Those armoured cars that they have, of which we know there are 8, actually pushed up onto a spur to the right on the junction where the French are operating to act in, and I've put a question mark, suppressive fire role, certainly to put covering fire down on the flanks. This isn't about men just running forward aimlessly without any sort of leadership. We're starting to see a few innovations. Here's some more pros to the actual attack on the 4th of June. It's decided that all of the objectives are going to be limited to an 800-yard advance, so their start lines are a lot closer to their objective than had happened previously before, and they knew where their objective was. The idea was then they would carry that Turkish trench and advance to a new line 500 yards on. Why would you do that? Well, firstly, you should always fight through your objective. There's absolutely no point in capturing a Turkish trench. The first thing you need to do is turn it around because it faces the wrong way. The second thing you need to do is be aware that the enemy artillery, what they've got, is pinned all to that position you've just captured. So they're likely to put down a devastating barrage on you. It's a lot easier to go forward and dig yourself a new trench. There is going to be a short bombardment and then a feint, a pause. And during this time, bear in mind there are 4 divisions crammed into this landscape going forward. The men are going to shout and holler and bang their spades as if to say, here we come, here we come. So knowing that the Turks will then man their trenches and then a secondary bombardment. Again, that's a form of deception. one that fails, but it shows they're trying to think as best they can. What are the problems with this attack? Well, firstly, the Turks have also had time to reinforce their trenches. They're well rested, they're deeper entrenched. Another one that crops up a lot in the Gallipoli campaign is this being a multinational force. Our flanks with the French. That's not a derogatory statement about the French. This is purely one about not a shared language, not a shared command and control system, and actually it's basic as not having the same rifles and ammunition, so you can't go to your neighbour and say, can we borrow some stuff please? All of these sort of things that are quite important. So there's no NATO 558 standard round in these days. So you've got to be working alongside the French, and that's actually going to be one of the downfalls. The attack is going to go ahead at midday. Why? Well, maybe the sun will be in the Ottomans' eyes as we attack. But it's the heat that's going to be the problem. Midday attack. The initial outpost lines were captured fairly early on, but at that stage 50% of the assault force had become casualties already, and more than 50% of the officer force had become casualties. So command and control starts to break down. The two battalions, Drake and Benbow, they're the ones that are going to resume that attack, and that they were, once they arrived, realised that that attack would involve going forward unsupported, no artillery. Absolutely folly. Decision was made not to push forward that attack. Completely opposite to if Mel Gibson was making a film where he'd blame a British officer for saying go on regardless. Yeah? But the attack, common sense, was not launched. Those men were used to consolidate the existing trench, the ground they'd gained from counterattack, which is going to be a big problem. And by the time, a couple of hours later, we realised that the French on the right had not been able to move forward, a lot tougher country than we had to fight across. Then they were starting to get enfilade fire on their flanks, who decided to withdraw back to that initial position. Whilst there are some gains in the third Battle of Kafia, sadly the Royal Naval Division are unable to push the line much further forward than the start line. What's the cost in that? Well, of that assaulting force of 1,900 men, 70 officers, within 45 minutes, we're down to 5 officers and 950 men. That sort of attrition casualty rate is not going to be sustainable in the Gallipoli campaign because we're not getting the reinforcements at such a rapid rate. Now, I'm not going to say these Benbow and Collingwood are disbanded because of heavy casualties. That's wrong. The decision's made because all of the battalions are now low down on numbers. It's at this point that Benbow and Collingwood are kind of separated and pushed into all the other battalions to try and bring them back up to strength and retain some esprit de corps within the division. And Gallipoli doesn't end there. The guys carry on, they keep holding this line, and in fact Sue Hetherington was somewhere in the audience. Your relative is killed digging a new trench just a few weeks later with 40 men of the battalion exposed position digging a trench. So they are going to continue fighting in Gallipoli, and in fact these are one of the divisions also going to be re-landed at Helles and staying until January. So planning to Gavrelle. Well, we can't skip just straight forward to Gavrelle. What we need to realise is what happens in between before I start on this bit. Firstly, I should mention that there was a parade of all of the original members of the Hood Battalion, that had landed in April 1915. This takes place in Egypt, of which only 15 members of the battalion stepped forward. When it says all those that landed in April, please step forward. 15 men from that original draft were left in the battalion. One of those men was our Thomas Russell, who stepped forward. And it was not until he got to France he actually received his cap badge. That's when they started receiving their cap badges. Of course, when they go to France, they are involved in the major action on the Somme at the Ancre Canal on the 13th November, 14th November, a night attack. And it was during this attack that Thomas was killed. He's not going to see the end of the war. It was during this attack that the chap we will see at the end of Ahern was wounded and ends his war. And of course it was at this attack that Freyberg puts right the Victoria Cross and has awarded it. And it's also in this attack that, as we'll hear afterwards with our next speakers, John's going to mention when we talk about Frederick Kelly, also meets his end as well. So they have had some Western Front experience, but things have changed from regards to planning. This is actually a cartoon out of the Royal Marines Gazette from around April 1917. I think it's quite lovely, isn't it? One of the minor horrors of war. Past due for necessary action, please. Here's the This is the Battle of the Typewriter in full effect. Returns, pamphlets, doctrine coming out of your ears. As a young officer, you haven't got time to deal with everything all of the time. And you can see he's having a well-earned break there. Reminds you of that lovely cartoon that every British officer had to ask himself, am I offensive enough? And when you look at that, he looks pretty offensive to me, doesn't he? Technological and also tactical advances. God, don't we talk about this a lot? Fantastic. SS-143 is now in operation. On top of that, the secret weapon of the Battle of Arras, the 106 Grays fuse, is going to really enhance these guys' chance of success. What I've done is I've shown you 143 as my nod to, yes, I've read it, but I've brought it down to this very short, sharp synopsis of it because it's important when we look at what happens at Gavrelle. Firstly, point A, the offensive spirit. All ranks must be taught that their aim and object is to come to close quarters with the enemy as quickly as possible and to be able to use the bayonet. Well, that's going to be good stuff for the Royal Naval Division. This must become second nature. B, the most important, initiative. The matter of control by even company leaders on the battlefield is now so difficult that smaller formations, platoon and section commanders must be trained to take the initiative without waiting for orders. Here we see that semblance of mission command coming into effect. Confidence in your weapons, necessitating a high standard of skill at arms. I haven't got a veteran of the Battle of Crofia to walk in at this moment and you all stand up and cheer. Those were the days when you could roll out Joe Murray or something to talk to us all. What we have got is this is a veteran of the Battle of Crofia. This is the Lee Enfield rifle issued to the Royal Naval Division that was used in the Gallipoli campaign. So I'd ask you all to come up and have a look at it at the end there, with its cut-off aim position, its volley sights and all the accoutrements to go with it. When we talked about retaining that esprit de corps, which is G there, about how we keep the esprit de corps, each section considers itself as best, that happens at divisional level as well. This was only used once, used at Gallipoli, after which the Royal Naval Division took it back to their depot and made new troops drill with Gallipoli weapons so they had some association with the campaign that had gone before them. What a lovely idea. So one careful owner and then it falls into my hands. But this is all original matching numbers used by them. A lovely thing. And there's no doubt by the time we get to April 1917, the British soldier did have his confidence in his weapon. In fact, when we say weapons, we should see that after the Somme, where perhaps we got a little bit over-reliant on the use of the Mills bomb, we started to impact on our musketry skill. We started to readjust that balance so that we can get it about right. And certainly we're back now to being competent riflemen again. That was deactivated, you're okay. Discipline. Most necessary at all times, and particularly on the battlefield, just like a Battle Honours stroke Gallipoli Association, Western Front Association tour, Stephen. Morale must be heightened by every possible means. Confidence in leaders and weapons goes a long way towards it, and perhaps even the ex-postman, now the sergeant, singing a few scurrilous songs will help you along the way. So what occurs on St George's Day 1917? Well, some of you will know this ground very well. This is the road here down towards Chili Trench Cemetery, a bit out here, wasn't it? So, get you orientated. The first objectives are actually captured within 10 minutes. 10 minutes. This is Nelson and Drake battalions. This is behind the creeping barrage. For a Lance Corporal stroke, who can tell me the problem with the creeping barrage? All of you who've been on tour with me will know this.
It creeps at its own pace.
It doesn't creep, it jumps. Okay, so civilians on tour assume a creeping barrage is like the end of Dad's army when they march forward and the shells bounce in front of them. That's a rolling barrage. The creeping barrage effectively lands a series of shells. When it lifts, you've got to be down on the ground. Then when it starts landing further ahead, you've got to rush up to that and get down before it lifts again. It's actually intense cardiovascular activity. It's going to be the most exciting beep test you've ever taken part in, okay? So these creeping barrages, they're great, they're fantastic, they're tough if you're actually behind one, but they're preferable to not having a barrage at all, like some of the Crofia veterans would have commented on. Now there's also been a bit of an issue in command structure here because Freiberg, the big hero of the division, just 2 days before this attack, has now been made divisional commander, 58th, or brigade commander, sorry, 58th Division. Therefore, we turned to Asquith, who's wounded, not entirely fit, and told him that he has to take over here and bring Hood forward, as part of the second line, to go on to that secondary objective there. And we're starting to see how the British Army changes. In fact, if I was able to imaginally put a wood here and a river there, we'd be able to see the British soldier in 1917 being able to leave a trench, carry a trench, fight in an urban operation, capture a wood and then cross the river, all of which needs a different hat and is a different skill and something that's easy to lose when you just flick through the Battleground Europe series book and say, oh yeah, we should have done that. It's a lot more complicated than that. So what Asquith sees, he realises that he's now brought up to the first objective and he knows what's going to happen when you capture a German trench. The Germans are going to shell it immediately. His start line is factually going to be part of the defensive barrage by the Germans. So what he does is makes the decision, mission command, to seize the initiative on the battlefield and rush forward to their second objective ahead of schedule. Now this is very useful, they get into the town, but once you get into the village and you start fighting, this phrase, a fog of war, is actually a real thing. It is the fog and the dust, and soon battalion action will break down to sections as they're in rubble of woods, not knowing where the enemies are, and fog of war being the smoke and everything happening around you, collapsing buildings on you. It's for this reason, knowing that's going to happen, that a reorganisation was planned on that second objective. Actually, momentum was so good, the men didn't need the reorganisation. So the longer they sat there and tried to get themselves sorted, the more that initiative was being handed back to the Germans, because they can now react to it. Regular phrase from this page, Asquith, seizing the initiative, renews that attack onto the final objective 600 yards on, which we can see here, just on the other side of Gavrelle. What he comes across are two key strong points, very well defended by the Germans in the chateau and also the windmill. He realises by the time he gets there that he's only got a fraction of the force that he needs, so he decides to try and capture part of it and consolidate. What he does is he captures the mayor's house, again seizing the initiative, capturing the mayor's house, and it's still at that stage standing. He managed to get some of his snipers and Lewis guns up into the elevated position, and they're able to protect what gains he's got. At the same time, he starts to reorganise his force. At this stage, it's 6:45, 2 hours into the battle, he's still going strong. That small force, throughout the day, are reinforced, but not by a huge amount. At 16:30, despite continual counterattacks, are still holding on. Gavrelle here for us, we have to move on because it needs more than a 45-minute talk. That initial one-day battle then degenerates into what is a 5-day battle. But how has it changed from Crofia? Well, these two photographs, I don't know if any of you have seen these before, these sketches. I probably think not, because a veteran gave me these. He didn't do them, but he sort of summed up his experience. He was with the Royal Naval Division Artist Rifles, who were part of that division at Passchendaele, who's wounded, and he got these off of a Gallipoli veteran out of his sketchbook. He told the apocryphal story that I'm sure has been told hundreds of times. I'll tell you this, that when he arrived at Pol Capel, or the ruins of Pol Capel, he was very excited to lead the Artist Rifles forward as their point man and take over from the Royal Naval Division. Of course, there was no Pol Capel, there was just holes in the ground. And out of the hole, a twinkling light, he heard a voice say, "Can it be true? Are you really here? Are you the Artist Rifles?" And my mate went, "Yeah, that's us, we're the Artist Rifles." And out of this dugout came a member of the Royal Naval Division. Someone he couldn't believe this could have been a veteran of Antwerp, Crofia, Gavrelle. He said, "Yeah, we're the Artist Rifles." This bloke looked him up and went, "God, I'm glad you're here, I'm starving, go and draw us a picture of bacon and eggs." And overnight, his sort of, within an instant, his morale dipped. But anyway, he was given these sketches later on. Jack Marris is his name, lovely chap, signaller, so bright lad. He had, about his person, a collection of concert party programmes that he gave me, and they're folded and marked, and you can see where they've been tucked in his pocket, going through the whiz-bangs. And in one he's very proud of, because Miss Ellen Terry would say a few words. She didn't sing, she just said a few words. It also says in there, I know I'm digressing, it also says in there that in the event of Hunnish methods, make your way to the nearest exits. What a lovely way of describing an air raid, isn't it? A Hunnish method. Anyway, he had these two, and they're lovely. I thought I'd use them for this, because this is the R&D in Gallipoli, and this is the R&D on the Western Front. And if you look, he's daydreaming there, back to Gallipoli, where he's sat. So it's an interesting parallel. So let's look at the two again. Crofia in June 1915, an offensive action over open country. It was attacked and launched at midday in Syrian heat. The key weapon, well, I've shown you it, a rifle and a bayonet. Short rushes, no chance of trench doors, no chance of resupply really. You carry what you can and get on with it. Very negligible artillery support, but we're starting to see deception techniques come in. What happens at Grafia? Initially we gain the ground, we hold it against counter-attack, but then we withdraw back to the start line. Our casualties are roughly 50%. The key reason for failure is put down to the underestimation of the enemy. So we move 2 years forward almost. This is an offensive action again, but across urban terrain. Instead of midday, it's 4:45. The conditions aren't serious heat, they're cold, snow and sleet throughout. Prior to the advance has been excessive patrol activity. This reconnaissance of the ground we're about to go is important. We've also secured our start line. There's also practice in platoon formations prior to the assault. They have been in the line a couple of days before they go in. Infantry-wise, we have now got Stokes mortar and machine gun support. Artillery-wise, we've talked about the 106 Grey Fuse, the ability to go have creeping barrages, the ability of FOOs, but also air support incorporating with the artillery. So there's a lot more to help them now. The result is, 1st, 2nd and 3rd German lines are captured and consolidated. But still, and this is the important part, not without what the division would regard as disproportionate losses to that success. Around about 40%, 50%, 40%. Initial ground gained, then withdrawn, 3 lines captured and consolidated. The reason for this disproportionate losses and also the high amount of casualties is put down in 1917 to an underestimation of the enemy. And this is something that we're really not going to get grips to until we get to 1918. So why am I talking about this whole campaign really? I'm no soldier, not a sailor at all. Well, my Auntie Belle, bless her, she was London proper. She used to say didn't, wouldn't and couldn't. And she said, you know, your uncle, he was in the war and all. And but all the letters were lost in the Blitz. And I thought, well, okay, that's a shame. Then one day she rang up and she said, hey Clive, we found a Tesco's bag full of these letters. Would you like to see him? I said, oh yeah, bring them round. She said, well, you know, what time shall I come? When's the next bus? And presently Auntie Belle arrived and she got out these letters. And the first thing I saw on the letters was able seaman. And, you know, I'm very proud of I'm a soldier, so I'm not going to give too much credit to the Navy. Sorry about that, Eric. But, you know, I know the senior service is a brand of cigarette, and I know they do very well and come second in the rugby every year. But,
and without them, you wouldn't get anywhere.
But that aside, you know, I thought, oh, I bet he had an easy war on Channel Ports. And then it dropped down, and I could see that Dundee Company 1st War Battalion 13 platoon. And in amongst the letters was this literary gem, not, written from Royal Naval Division Engineer Dunn, back to my great grandmother, Emma there. So any baldering comments, lads, I'd like you to realise it's my great grandmother. The clues were there all the time because she's wearing a Hawk Battalion badge on there, as well as she's looking behind the curtain. It says, my dear sister Emma, just a few lines to say I've received your most welcome letter, which I was very pleased to get on Sunday. Well, I'm very pleased to hear that you are keeping in good health and that you are still making shells and bullets for us, though I expect it is very hard work for you. But never mind, Emma dear, try and keep merry and bright. Keep us with plenty of shells and bullets, and then we can keep back that wicked beast of the Kaiser of Germany. But we hope God will give him what he has asked for, which I'm sure he will. Well, I'm in the trenches writing this to you. Well, the weather is a little better this time up. Well, I hope you get a few days off. No doubt you'll be glad to get them, but as you say, it's no use grumbling in wartime. I'm sure we all feel grateful to you for helping us. I don't think this will last much longer now. He looks victorious now. Well, I do hope you're in good health, as it leaves me at present. Well, my dear sister, I think this is all this time, so I must now close with my best love to you. We'll write more next time, but must now close. Heaps of kisses. I remain your loving brother, Arthur. Just these few I send, and then all the kisses. That's one of about 50 letters. Now, why didn't I know of my uncle? He was wounded in the Battle of Beaumont Hamel, and actually the man that censors all of these letters, and F.W. Turnbull, is actually buried in Ancre Cemetery. That's quite something, visiting the grave of an officer that censored your uncle's mail. It ended his war as well, Arthur's, and they met once in Surrey Commercial Docks, now known to estate agents as Surrey Quays. And when they met there in the pub, Emma told her brother that she was getting married to a soldier. He said, if you marry a soldier, I'll never speak to you again. She married my great-granddad Charlie Adams, and as far as we're aware, the two of them never spoke again, and we'll never know what happened to Arthur. I've no idea when he died, or anything, so there's worthy of further research, as I say. However, just to end and bring us back before we take questions, I've written that there, D Company, 1st Hawk Platoon. Now I know at 26, Arthur was not a babe. I know that he's more likely to be a mudlark than a beachcomber, being from South East London. So we'll return to the Army's loss was Hawk Battalion's gain. This miscellaneous, cheerful, enthusiastic and wholly undisciplined collection of babes, bookmakers and beachcombers became known for official purposes returns as D Company. And I'll leave it to you to suggest which one Arthur was. Thank you.
I want to find the private, I know where he is, I know where he is, I know where he is. If you want to find the private, I know where he is, he's hanging on the old barbed wire.